report released by the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research last year, South Africans actually endured 859 hours of these rolling blackouts, making it the most intensive year of load shedding. Now, despite a decline in demand due to the extended lockdown, Eskom now produces less power than it did about a decade ago. In 2019, for instance, a CSIR report estimated that in the previous 10 years, load shedding cost the South African economy around 338 billion rands. The question now, what does this mean for Africa's most industrialized economy? For this, let's bring in one of the authors of this CSIR report, Dr. Jarrad Wright, who joins us now via our video link. Thanks very much for your time. Great to have you on the program. Perhaps let's continue taking stock of the grid as it stands before we chart a way forward. We've heard from Eskom officials that South Africans will be saddled with these rolling blackouts for an additional 5 years or so. Is the picture on the grid as bad as that sounds?
Well, what we did is we summarized statistics from last year, from 2020, as well as all the way back to 2010, based on Eskom data that they've been kind enough to provide. During 2021, though, indeed it has not started well. We've gone through about 20% of the year thus far, and we've actually already load shed 40% of the levels of 2020. So 2021 is also not looking very good. Indeed, 2019, the year before that, was actually the worst year of load shedding. 2020 got a bit worse. And so far, if you track the data, although the demand is actually 5% lower than last year, our load shedding levels are actually higher on a relative basis already, even though we are only midway through March.
Part of what I understand was also done as part of the study is actually looking at the cycle of load shedding to gauge how it's changed. What does that mean?
Yeah, so what we did is we took the data and looked at it all the way down to an hourly basis as to when the load shedding occurs. Typically, as you would expect, during high demand periods is when it occurs, so during the day, during the evening peaks. We've tried to discern some level of sort of seasonality across the months, but we don't necessarily see any pattern there as yet. But for sure, you do see increased constraints on the grid during the winter periods, so May, June, July, August, when the temperatures get colder, the system demand goes up. And although Eskom do slightly less maintenance during those winter periods and try to do it in the summer periods, we do see increased levels of load shedding during those periods of the year.
There are now calls for a more consumer-centered response to this crisis, a call, if you like, for consumers to try finding their own ways of getting supply. A, are we in that position as South Africans, do you think, economically speaking? And B, how sustainable would that strategy actually be?
Yeah, so it would have to be a multi-pronged approach. I think there are various processes and procurement processes, at least, whether it's via the DMRE's risk mitigation program, there's the implementation of the integrated resource plan, but all of these things take time. So in terms of the research that we actually published last year, and we will be publishing some new research in the next few weeks, we suggested a customer response at scale. It could be a combination of things, including demand-side response, so being more energy efficient, but also investing in your own self-supply options. Of course, understanding that households, citizens, aren't necessarily in the position where they can afford to invest in self-supply options, but there are components of the customer segments that can do that. That reduces strain on the grid, that allows them for lower levels of load shedding, or hopefully the reduction completely of load shedding. So industrial customers, commercial customers in the agricultural sector, if they can start to invest in some level of self-supply to then alleviate the constraints on the grid, then we may see very quick response in terms of levels of load shedding and lower levels of load shedding sooner rather than later.
Yeah. The figure being quoted is 338 billion rands, and that's how much load shedding, we're told, has cost the economy. How much confidence can we have in that figure, given the fact that a lot of the loss is actually unquantified? If we just think about the amount of businesses that aren't able to operate as you and I even speak right now, it's very easy for that loss to go unnoticed.
Indeed. So in terms of the methodologies used to calculate what that economic loss may be, a lot of the time it focuses on the direct costs, so the direct costs of those outages, but direct, indirect, and induced costs, so all of those multipliers that come through, as well as the indirect effect of reduced business confidence, reduced foreign direct investment, are not necessarily always quantified, so it could be slightly higher in some cases. It's always open to discussion, but I think the important part here is that it's not zero. It's something that is costing the economy, and it's something that we don't necessarily want to see. So in order for us to recover and come out of the 2020 that we saw and grow the economy, we do need to make sure that we rectify this as soon as possible.
Yeah, I guess it's also important to reflect on the fact that it's not necessarily all doom and gloom. Eskom, in some respects, is getting some things right, aren't they? Their communication around what's actually happening and laying out their cards as they stand. How well do you think they're doing on that score?
Yeah, I think they're trying to be as transparent as possible in a lot of ways. To be completely honest, this data that we presented in this recent publication is as a result of Eskom being transparent with data. They provided a data portal towards the end of last year, which enables us to do this kind of detailed analysis. Similarly, they're being very clear as to the fact that they are doing the maintenance they need to do. They're trying to make sure that the forced outages or unit breakdowns reduce as soon as possible, and they need the space to do that. If they don't necessarily have the space to do that, then they won't be able to make sure that the plants are reliable in the medium to long term. So they will do what they can do. They have indicated then that they welcome other producers coming online to make sure that the country's supply-demand balance can be met. And as I said before, that may include the implementation of the integrated resource plan, the inclusion of additional capacity from other suppliers, as well as even customers themselves starting to take it into their own hands and self-supply some of their needs. Not necessarily all of them, but some of their energy needs.
Interesting insights indeed. Dr. Wright, thanks very much for your time. Really appreciate you coming onto the AM report. Dr. Jarrad Wright is one of the authors of that CSIR report looking at the national grid, where in part we're finding that wind and solar energy now contribute more to the national grid than generated by the country's sole nuclear plant. Dr. Wright, once again, thanks very much indeed.